Hello and good evening, everybody. Welcome back. Another week, another time with an awesome man, awesome dude, Mr. Ivan Humble. This is Imran Muhammad, one of the hosts for Me and You Education. But of course, creating the conversation is the podcast itself. Guys, we are very honored to have you today. And it's been a heavy week in a lot of ways. It seemed like we've just been working ourselves into the ground for some odd reason. Maybe that's just me. Hopefully, I'll have a conversation with Ivan. Ivan, how's your week been, man?
It's been quite good, actually. Quite laid back. I had a lazy day today. Batteries recharged. Ready for
Excellent.
next week.
Live and
As you know, we've
kicking.
got. As you know, we've got. As you know, we've got a busy week next week.
We do. I agree with you. Now, guys, we have once again part two. What we're talking about, the next chapter, guys. We are honored to have this amazing guest once again. It was very nice of him, and it was we're immensely grateful to him that he said to us that he's gonna do this second session with this part two on creating the conversation podcast. So I'm gonna bring him up. You're already aware of him. This is Jesse Curtis Morton. Welcome, my man. How are you, sir? How are you doing? Are you well? I hope you had a good week.
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you for having me again. Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum
Hi, Adam.
salam.
Hi, Imran.
Hello, mate. How you doing? How's the family? The kids all right?
Everything is good.
Excellent.
Another
This-
week. Another week of lockdown down, I suppose you could say.
I've got to give it to you. You. There's always something going on in America, and with this, Meghan Harry stuff going on. It's gone all mad.
Yes, indeed.
What are your thoughts
The
on
whole
that?
world. The whole world is upside down, but the United States, I think we could argue, maybe takes the cake. Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. You know what I mean? There's not a single week that goes by and nothing has happened. I'm thinking, what? Another. And he had to be in Oprah as well. I was like, what? Really? It was just mad. And it's gone crazy. Last year, because of the whole issue around the race thing and with the police and the black community and all of that, all right, and George Floyd and all of that was occurred. And suddenly we're back up again. The same issue, the same concern, the same stories. It just got mad. You know what I mean? I think this is it's an ongoing circular type of motion of life, isn't it? Whatever, it's happened before it happens again. Jesse, this week we are going to touch on something very, very important. Hopefully this week we'll be conversing with yourself about how you found a way out of the world of violent extremism. Because last week we discussed about your life, how it began, your origins, who you are, what your background is. We spoke about your family life, which has been amazing. And guys, those of you who are going to come back to us later on, you can find that particular podcast on Creating the Conversation podcast. Please check it out. Hopefully we'll stick it down as well, and you can tap on that and check that out as well. Now, this week, of course, is about this man's removal, finding himself out of violent extremism. And he didn't only stop there. Well, the beautiful thing about this is he didn't only stop there. He wanted to take others out of that as well. He wanted to help others who are in the place where he was a few years ago. So, Jesse, last time when we talked about you were a recruiter. You had done some really crazy things. And right at the end of it, you got slammed. Go for it, my brother. Tell me what happens from there.
So I don't recall specifically where we left. I know we talked a little bit about me being in Morocco, being arrested several weeks after Osama bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad, and the U.S. government moved to eradicate the playing field, thinking the war on terror was over. We expected a democratization of the Middle East due to the Arab Spring, and thought the jihadist threat would wind down. One of the reasons we thought that was because I myself was picked up. And so I was returned after 5 months in a Moroccan jail, where I met Mohammed Fizazi, a first former I had come to contact with in my life, and was flown back by private jet to the US, where I basically told the truth about how I felt and convicted myself essentially on the ride home. But when I returned to the United States, I was housed in Alexandria Detention Center, which is the sort of famous place in the United States that housed Zachary Moussaoui, Ali Timimi,
Big name, big names.
a lot of terrorist cases were there, and as is protocol and process in that facility, I was put in solitary confinement, which essentially means that in the United States, that's 23 and 1 is what we call it. 23 hours in the cell, 1 hour out for a shower and a little bit of fresh air every day.
Jesse, that must have been really heavy for you. A man who had traveled the world, you had the freedom of the world, and suddenly you're in a place where 23 hours you're stuck. That must have been mad.
It is, and it's a lot different experiencing it than when you're out there telling people as an extremist that that you're willing to die for your beliefs or go to prison for your beliefs. But when the shit hits the fan and you're really there, you find yourself challenged and tested. Yes. And unfortunately, I will say I don't support solitary confinement. But I do understand where they were coming from. I mean, I was an individual that had the gift of gab and knew the ideology. So to put me into general population, there's risks as well, So I get where they were coming from, but
no, I agree with you. But at the same time, because the nature of some of the work that we do with individuals who we call it segregation here, right? So solitary confinement. Now, it's something which has a massive impact negatively upon the mental health of individuals,
yes,
and even the ability to not how or lose the ability to socialize with people. So their behaviors change, the way they engage or disengage with general society changes, and especially if it's a long period of time. And that's the thing. It does leave a mark. How long were you there for? How long were you in that particular state?
I ended up staying in solitary confinement for almost a year. And you're right. I mean, in most countries in the world, 23 and 1 lockdown would be considered a form of torture due to the psychological studies that have been conducted on it. But I was fortunate because, again, as a person who had been on the street, as a person who had caused such havoc in taking those street skills and putting them into the realm of radicalization and recruitment, I was kind of able to make my way to a friendly situation where a guard would take me to the law library 4 days a week during her 10-hour shifts. Right. And at least I could get out at 3 o'clock in the morning when the jail is shut down and move around and sit in a law library surrounded by books, which for a part of my personality has spent a large portion of my life with books. And I found solace in certain moments. And it ended up being a very healthy therapeutic dynamic because I think if there was anyone that I should have talked to in those months, it was me.
Wow.
And I had to sit myself down and have a serious conversation. And I also had to put other casts and figures around me, and they started to become different people. And they were largely only accessible friends that I could have in the moment was a Syrian spy who had spied on behalf of Bashar al-Assad, who was in another cell. An individual who had carried out a jihadist attack and who was housed in solitary like myself, and then another individual who was a leader of MS-13, which is a very big gang here. But apart from that, when I'd be up in the law library, I got to introduce myself to Montesquieu. I got to introduce myself and work through the work of Descartes, worked through John Locke, fell in love with Thomas Paine, Enlightenment thinkers, and really understood for the first time in my life with depth and detail why, for all of its imperfections, the American system and the democracy that I considered to be shirk and forbade people from participating in was certainly superior to the top-down authoritarian ideology that I myself held. And that
that Jesse, that is a phenomenal awareness and realization by you, because a lot of people who tend to go down this ideology or get influenced by this particular ideology, 9 times out of 10, they don't fully understand where they are. Because what I've seen is that a lot of people who have these particular ideologies, it's like when they were radicalized or when they came across individuals who were recruiters, they had given them a particular narrative. Right, so these individuals latched onto that narrative. They don't know anything. They don't know the nuances. They don't know the other aspects and elements, or they might know 1 or 2 or 4 verses of the Quran or Hadith or whatever, just to justify that particular ideology. And look what you've done. You're getting an opportunity to delve into your psyche, delve into your, the society that you were living in, like you said, a society that you consider to be shirk, association with God Almighty. How dare you? You're war in this place. What are you doing? Why are you giving, that what is God's into man's hand for? Do you understand? But but even, for me, this is amazing. Like, even for you to pick up a book to try to understand that's like, what compelled you? Just the love of books? Or was
Well,
it
I
something
mean,
else?
yeah, I mean, when you're everybody that adopts a role inside of an extremist movement picks that role largely because of their own personal background. So while I was radicalizing, Islam gave me stability. And as I said, I went to college. I ran an outpatient substance abuse treatment program in Brooklyn, New York for 8 years. I graduated from Columbia University with a degree in international relations. So I was always interested in the ideas. And most people that are part of extremist movements don't latch onto the ideology where they dive all the way in. But the radicalizer, the recruiter, the propagandist certainly does. So I always had this thirst and this aspiration. And as we discussed last week, it was modeling my life on the trajectory of Malcolm X. And one of the key legacies or principles of life that Malcolm's analysis and understanding Malcolm's life, because the people that we hold dear to, there's their life stories, they leave an imprint on us, and we don't recognize how much the stories that we hear, like Quran says, that in the stories of the prophets are, a system of guidance for you. And it understands that the single story of Isa bin Maryam or Yusuf alayhi salam, it prints itself on you and it will have implications for your behavior. And Malcolm's strength was the sense that he was able to, in my opinion, be a criminal and announce immediately and go full blown with such conviction into a new way of life with the Nation of Islam, and then to rise and to be a person of prominence in the national media and international media, but to go to Mecca and to leave alone his false ideas about black nationalism and white man is the devil and black man is God immediately, and to betray his leader and his cult leader, in fact, and to exit the cult, so.
I agree with you. Jesse. Look, but the thing is, there are certain people who are inclined towards extremities. There are people like that. Some people love being an extreme. Now, you just picked to Malcolm X. Just hold for a second. He did go from one extreme to the other extreme.
Yeah, 100%.
Right? He did. So there was, it had to be a journey of extremity first. So he came from one extreme, which was, whatever life he was having. He was a pimp, he was a drug dealer, he was whatever he was, get slammed. And then he found the other extreme.
Yes, he did, and didn't even realize it. And I had too, right? So my transformation was the same way, but I could have chosen any interpretation of Islam, right? But the interpretation of Islam that I went toward was this idea of social justice Islam. But because of my own sort of trauma, my own sort of pain, my own sort of rejection of my society and throwing hate in the other direction like Malcolm did, but the context in which that occurred, being born when the 9/11 thing, or being converting right before 9/11 and finding Islam to be a lens through which I could potentially understand a mass event like September the 11th, 2001, and to feel betrayed and then gravitate toward jihadist Islam, was going from one state of hate to another. But here's the reality is, it's not really what you latch onto outside of yourself, because what you latch onto outside of yourself is a direct reflection of who you are and how you feel about yourself, right? And that's what's really crucial to understand in doing what they call de-radicalization work. I don't know, it means everything for different people, and it's not about that, but dealing with self-hatred is really the reason a lot of times that people find it's frustration, anger, animosity, but it's with self at the end of the day.
Yeah, Jesse, there's a saying amongst the Arabs in it, Man arafa nafsahu, qad arafa rabbahu.
Whoever knows their self, yes.
Knows his Lord, which is the ultimate unknown to us. In a way, what I do see amongst individuals who become radicalized, or people who go down this particular path of radicalized, extremism, or whatever type, it might be anything else. It might be someone who become obsessed with botany, for example. I don't know, whatever it is, something that they become obsessed over. There is naturally there is a sense of loss of that person. They lose themselves within that.
Yes, they lose it to the group, and they lose their ability to individualize themselves. And that's really associated with keeping you at a lower level of self. So like tribalistic natures of living where you're in your ethnic group or your tribe or your collective of the guruba, the strange ones who will be always fighting until the day of judgment, and 72 sects from amongst the believers, only one of which is in the Jannah. And all of this philosophy is to make you and feed your narcissistic superior needs. But that's your tribe. But if you can not belong to a tribe and individualize yourself at the same time, and you're affected by groupthink, then that means you don't really know who you are.
Yes.
And you are just absorbing what you are belonging to, because it's giving you needs that you don't know how to give to yourself. And that's the real problem with leaving extremist movements. People leave extremist movements all the time and go into one other level of extremism, and they don't even realize it. And Ivan, and you can't really say that out loud that much these days, because you do have very touchy, sensitive young people that have not yet necessarily experienced enough pain in life to know what it is to be an adult and to think with nuance. And hopefully someday they'll learn how. But yeah, I mean, it happens all of the time. And so the person can still be an extreme person. And a narcissist is always going to be a narcissist. If they're a narcissist in jihadism, they're going to be a narcissist when they leave, right? But really, the necessity is to to know yourself. And that takes us back to that cell in solitary confinement.
Yes, it does.
Because I had to individually make choices, because I was faced with this idea that I didn't have to think about my future, because my future was going to be in a federal prison. My idea was, do you just give up and go with this, even though in Morocco and in the run-up to the year before you were arrested, you knew you were wrong? Or do you not, for the sake of anybody but yourself, try to retain this idea that, and quite frankly, it started with the idea that we are created, we will be resurrected, God will hold us accountable for our deeds, and we are only as good as our deed that we die on. So it was a firm commitment to Islam that allowed me to open up that seed to reform myself.
Okay, Jesse, 1 sec then. See, now what you are doing is de-radicalizing.
Disengaging first and working. My disengagement started when I left the country and I went to Morocco, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was just taking myself outside that group think, that community that you talk about. And when I get these kids out of like neo-fascist groups online, and I get them alone on Twitter or in DM, because a lot of them don't like to talk on the phone and be like, face to face or whatever, they're completely different people than they are when they're in the group.
Yeah, of course. And I have the same experience. I know Ivan did as well, where when I come across people who are part of a gang or part of a particular team or whatever it is, it's the same psychology that's working there. When you remove them from that comfort zone or group identity, and you take them on an individual level, you start seeing the immense vulnerabilities. You see things where they're lapsing, they're lacking. Right. And that's what's really interesting. In a way, like you said, I understand the solitary confinement, the segregation, the removal of an individual from general society to work with them. Right. I get it. And I understand all of this thing about, individual interventions that we do and etc. that work. But sadly, many of these individuals, right, and truthfully speaking, they are on the spectrum. They were on the autistic spectrum.
This is increasingly true. Yes.
We have found that, and this is a reality of the situation. We have found that the individuals that are being are attracted, not all. Let me be very clear, not all, but there's a high percentage of individuals who are on the spectrum, may have certain type of traits from the spectrum, autistic traits, etc. And because of that, these extremist organizations have honed into these people, and they give them. So how would one, because the thing is, guys, all of you listening at this moment, we're going to share with you some of the amazing work that Jesse does. It's amazing. You know what I mean? It's just out of this world, not only with the Islamists, of course, with the far right as well. And one of them, of course, is no doubt light upon light online. It's a website. It's a lot of work that you can see. You can see a lot of stuff that he does that are accounts, there are people's case studies that he's done, and there's some bunch of other stuff as well, which we're going to touch on throughout the whole thing as well. But Jesse, before we go there, I want you to shed some light on what I've just said regarding that there's a high percentage, there's a percentage of individuals who have autistic traits.
Well, I mean, it depends upon what milieu you're talking about. So mental health prevalency is something that has been, looked at prolifically to some degree in the literature on extremism and radicalization studies. It has some incongruencies, but it definitely has distinctions between groups. So, and it also has distinctions between context and place. But when we're talking about Western radicalization in countries like the UK and the United States, we just got done doing polling inside the involuntary celibate community, and we're seeing like 30% diagnosed, with 30% more that believe they would be diagnosed. So that's a unique population with a unique set of characteristics and a unique context and a unique grievance. When we talk about jihadism, the mental health is a little bit more inconclusive because it's hard to determine. As you know, Imran, in the Muslim community, to go to see a psychiatrist for assistance is not exactly something that you would do.
It's too much stigma.
Yeah, exactly. And increasingly less so, but amongst fundamentalists and people that are, adhering to that. But, and on the far right, you're right. I mean, it looks like we're looking at like 1/5 to a quarter even of these young people that are falling for not the radical right, but the extreme neo-fascist Adam Waffen, the base type,
the very black and white,
the leaderless resistance, Turner Diaries emulators, and the ones that want to, and that's because of the mentality of the condition. And the real conundrum when you're working with someone, and I've done it, several times now, as an interventionist, is you really have to take deep appreciation for the fact that there are no therapeutically backed evidence-based interventions with regard to working. There's some recommended guidelines, but there's no real understanding. And what I've found is that it's really important to try to appreciate their tendency to hyper focus on a particular issue, and not to necessarily be combative, but to offer them a menu and a selection of looking at things differently that then immediately you attach to something that inundates them with something new to be interested in. So that requires listening. And I have seen an individual who was young, not even an adult, that worked with me in private, just on Twitter, because typically doesn't want to talk online and whatnot. And I have seen conversations steer into the realm of like talking about the hard sciences, and it started with conversations about race science
on Twitter.
And back and forth race science. And I get burned out when I tweet, because I don't use Twitter as like a means of my primary. I use Twitter when I'm exhausted at the end of the day, or if I have something to say. So when I DM on Twitter, I'm exhausted. And
what's that? 160? Are you conversing in like 160 characters or something?
No, I'm talking DM. I'm talking private interventions. Yeah. You can do whatever you want in there. I just use voice to text. I can't, man. I don't know how they do it, man. The young kids, man. So anyway.
But then again, see, that's another thing. The online world, especially the Twitters and the Facebooks and whatever, when individuals are conversing on that particular platform, there is no nuance.
Well, it's a problem because of the lack of social connection associated with the presence of a digital. You might see somebody on a screen, but we know that it's not the same as human touch. And this is something that has become so common and prevalent, and now COVID has exacerbated it for us all. And what you don't feel it because it's little trauma over time. And the generation that we're dealing with that are coming up now, 21 and younger especially, have spent their entire lives with this. And the primary means of communication, even with regard to like discomfort in interaction with a member of the opposite sex or the same sex, if that's what you're attracted to or whatever, is totally distinguished. They have a persona that's online, and then they have a persona that's offline. And there's a lot of isolation, loneliness, and deep-rooted pain. But the online arena is a place where they're going to feed their they need dopamine. And so in the same way that drugs attract people because they release oxytocin and dopamine and oxytocin lead you to search for love. And the way they have the likes and the retweets and all of that, you're looking for love online through retweet and like, and through a digital sort of attempt to replicate reality and social connection in the real world. And then the oxytocin makes you want to belong to a group, and the tribalism inside of us and the neuroscience allows us to be predisposed to echo chambers. And so our tribalism sets in and we become part of the echo chamber. And we like to point out that extremists are all in echo chambers and that they engage in groupthink, and that the confirmation biases that extremist recruiters play off of, are well, actually, there's not a lot of work on that, but we're doing that work right now, which is very interesting. But at the end of the day, we all do it. Right.
Yeah, we are all in our echo chambers. Of course we are.
Yeah. And these people have grown up with it. So like this individual, like this is understanding like the need to transition. And we'll talk about this when we talk about our modality for control, alt, delete, hate paradigm for messaging and for personal change. This individual wanted to talk about race science. And so what we had to do in order to talk about race science, and race science is fascinating because as soon as you start to categorize people into race, which is a scientific process, you're scientizing humanity. The problem is you have to come up with a method through which you define who's black, who's brown, who's Asian, because we're living in a world that's increasingly intermixed. And no matter how you divide it up, the differences inside of any group, right, are much more diverse than the differences between any group. And so for a person that has a mathematical inclination, you just have to go there. And from there, you can rejuvenate an interest in science and give them alternative perspectives. And that's a person who's on the spectrum. For other people, that would just make them shut down. They would hate you because they would feel like you were challenging their superior ideas.
Jesse, hold your thought 1 second. Because there's a lot that you're giving us at this moment in time, right? Now, one of the key things is, one of the most difficult things for people, generally for people to understand, is the process. Because look, you are going into a lot of detail around how human beings' mind works, the internal aspects.
If you're present and you think about why people do what they do.
Yes. Exactly. We're talking about different aspects and elements, okay?
Sure.
Now, a lot of people, one of the biggest problems that we've had, and of course we'll touch on other aspects and elements, is that people are like, how can they be so extreme? How can they latch on to this extremist ideology? They live in the West. They have all the luxuries of the world. They can do whatever they want. They have all these freedoms. Why would they want to choose a very extreme way of living?
It's not a choice. It's subconscious. It's unconscious.
Help me with that. Come on, help me to understand that.
The overwhelming portion of things that we do are unconscious. Most of the things that go on in our brain, that's really the problem, is there's a lack of mindfulness and an ability to take a choice between stimulus and response, exacerbated by the overutilization of technology, exacerbated by a culture that teaches and engenders narcissism, a fascination with reality TV shows where even the most basic people can become overnight sensations, and the focus of attention is everybody craves attention. And unfortunately, in the real world, apart from what the culture is portraying through the entertainment world, people are not having their needs met, and they don't have healthy social connections. People are not engaging in sexual intercourse, long-term relationships, the anxiety levels, depression levels. So we know that the world that we are building is not healthy and not conducive to prosperity. And that in and of itself will make a person take all of those anxieties that they deal with because things are not as they want them to be. And then instead, they'll blame the external world for their lack of self-control, and they begin to hate everything outside of their self. But like I said, it's just a projection of hate. And then the randomness of the universe comes into play. And if that individual haphazardly bumps into someone who is a part of a positive group, they can heal. But they typically would be much more prone and inclined to join a social movement that is, expressing the same grievances that they have affected and giving them a reason and an excuse to be bitter. And it plays off the vulnerabilities and the needs, right? So in order to be a good interventionist, you have to exercise a whole lot of empathy, because to say that human beings that are in this condition are sleepwalking, right? And then to see them as culpable, but to be able to forgive them immediately because you understand their condition and you can feel them, is something you cannot teach. But it's something that if someone's been in these movements, then they have a lot of value with regard to understand how to I'm sure Ivan can do the same thing. I sit down with an individual, I make assessment. Within 20 minutes, I already know what I'm dealing with. But even if it's just online, but I reserve judgment, because that's the definition of true empathy, is not to pass judgment, nor to hold yourself as if you have an ability to be and function like a psychic. And I just listen. But a lot of times it's basically what I think, Ivan, I don't know if you agree, but you can pretty much see what the dynamics are, how committed the individual is, the factors, just from a look on the face, because it's ability to peer into the soul. When you recruit people for jihadism, you have to touch their spirit. And when you learn how to recruit and touch spiritual selves, especially from amongst the vulnerable, you understand for certainty beyond all reasonable doubt that, like, people are so, whether it's because of evolution or whatnot, people need spiritual needs met,
Yes.
And that's something our society doesn't achieve very
but Jesse,
well.
look, we have the hierarchy of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We have to fulfill the base requirements and needs first before we can get something out of that person. Guys, you're listening to Creating the Conversation podcast. We are with Jesse Curtis Morton, an individual who is, his background is that he became an individual who became a recruiter for Islamist organizations, and he has lived a very extreme lifestyle. And how he kept, today's conversation is around how he came out of all of that and how he helps others to also come out of that at the moment, as at this moment in time. Guys, you've been listening to how Jesse tends to do this within the first approximately half an hour of our conversation. I'm going to bring in Ivan into this, and I'm going to say, Ivan, what Jesse's been saying, does that resonate with you as well? And do you also see this? And of course, Jesse does work with the far right as well, but because you have come from that background, how do you, or what are your perspectives and views on what's been spoken about today?
That's exactly what I think. Doing this work that we do, we have like a sixth sense kind of thing. It's like a special gift, I call it, because not everybody can do what we do. Because the talking's the easy part. It's like I've always said, that listening is, because you're going to hear things that go against everything your moral compass stands for. But you can't judge that person because believe what he's saying. So who am I to doubt him? Instead about breaking down that conversation through showing a bigger picture.
Because I remember, Ivan, that there was a young man that you said yourself who had come after you online. And in fact, could you share that with our audience as well, and what approach you wanted to take and what you suggested to the police regarding that? Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember. As you know, Jay, everybody likes what we do. So I got a death threat, and it got more along the point, so they wanted to rape my daughters. So obviously I had to hand over to police. They did arrest somebody for it. I didn't want him charged. I wanted to try the historical justice way, to go have a conversation with him. It took quite a while to do, but in the end, my disappointment, they turned. So then they got charged for a stupid offence that could have been sorted out by a conversation. Because we've all been there, we've all written something angry online. So who was I to judge? Do you know what I mean? But as you get threats, you have to take some serious, don't you?
You do, definitely, my man. And the thing was, and in this particular case, both of you, Jesse and Ivan, I want to bring this in because I think some of the amazing work that you are doing, Jesse, is something that the world needs to know about. Guys, what you're looking at in front of you on the screen is lightuponlight.online. We're going to talk about some of the great work that Jesse has been doing, his team has been doing. Because the thing is, he went from a man who radicalized and groomed people towards extremity. Now he's doing something which is the right opposite to that. Jesse, how did that happen? Tell me what changed, please.
Well, we'll go through a short version to get to Light Upon Light. In 2011, and I was returned to the U.S. By 2012, I had completely started to reconfigure and open up, thinking I would spend the majority of my life in prison. But I was ultimately sentenced to 11 and a half years in a federal prison in the United States. And it was around the time that they were trying to do CVE, like you guys had done Prevent over in the UK already. The Obama administration was trying to do 2011 Strategic Implementation Plan for Countering Violent Extremism. Syria was starting to look more and more like it was going to be less an Arab Spring that would democratize the Middle East and like something that was going to reignite problems. Through a transformation that happened in the library and finding out about the terrorist plot in jail and people asking me questions about countering violent extremism and how to achieve certain successful mechanisms to do so, and people wanting to know about risk. I mean, I started to communicate with the U.S. government, and I started to be very open about certain things, like the fact that certain cases and practices here in the United States were problematic and counterproductive, particularly in the overutilization of informants and not having things like non-criminal interventions for people like de-radicalized former extremist operators. And a lot of people thought the same way and were saying the same things. But my insider's knowledge was very appealing to them because I was able to put it together holistically, multidimensionally, build out a risk assessment tool. And then my students started appearing in Syria and became prominent radicalizers and recruiters. They took my magazine model that we developed here in the U.S., made Dabiq, made Rumia. They were instructing Americans to attack random places, creating recipes for bombs and conveying them to the United States. And they thought that I would never de-radicalize. And so I helped make sure that some of those plots were thwarted. And I was released right after Barack Obama announced the global war against the ISIS, the Islamic State, and in response to the beginning of that coalition's onset of working to take back the caliphate, they were beheading Americans left and right. And so I returned to society March 2015, and I operated in a way where I was trying to impart a better education amongst those that are responsible for assessing and analyzing information and trying to determine if an individual is a threat or if they're just a loudmouth or what the case may be.
Jesse, you became the enemy.
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, from that old milieu, like from the extremist perspective, and even in general with regard to
you were eating from the hands of the enemy.
Well, if you saw,
you became the pawn of the system.
Well, that's one way to look at things until you get on the inside of the system. And that's why it's important to have experience. For example, if you want to be a white kid and help African Americans with their legitimate struggles, it would be important to have actually known an African American from the communities that you're trying to liberate first before you speak in their name. That's the utter problem with the world that we live in today. And that's just one example. I saw firsthand when the FBI came to me. I had to do a debriefing process to get a plea bargain. And they weren't waging a war against Islam. They were very curious. They were interested in understanding. And when they saw that I had already started to change, the conversations shifted to one of like, hey, we would really like to make sure that like nobody that you radicalize goes on to become a terrorist in domestic home front. And, there's absolutely nothing wrong with understanding the world in a way that's full of grays. And I saw it firsthand. I know for a fact that cops are not corrupt, that the people that are trying to understand domestic terrorism now are going to be accused of the same thing. They attack DHS buildings every day. And I know the people at DHS now personally are trying to develop mechanisms to make our society better. So when you see that, you easily start, it's part of your de-radicalization process.
It truly is. But Jesse, look, the problem I'm having at the moment is this. You said yourself, I had my students. They were in Syria, right? People who are learned from you. Yeah. They saw you as the guru. They saw you as the sheikh. They saw you as, the one who would never turn his back towards, against. I'm using the terminology. As a comrade, that's right. As a comrade, as someone that, being there, he gave us the ideology. He gave us that way of thinking. He showed us what the path is. Now suddenly he's turned his face at it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
that must have really gone down bad.
Oh, when I first came public, but yes, for sure. I mean, here's the complicated parts of my process are that eventually I had to, it was either go public as America's first former jihadist or allow a smear campaign in the Washington Post to essentially destroy the rest of my life. So as I went back into society, I continued to operate as an analyst, as someone who was able to gather intelligence. And then one day I went online and I said that I had been released early because I fought my case in court. My old sheikh, Abdullah Faisal, took me at my face value, put me right back into the network. And eventually I was outed as someone who worked in a case where they were going to behead someone at a muffler shop. And we interjected an attempted beheading. And when that case went to court, it was revealed that I worked as the informant, and the Washington Post put me out there and said,
So you went covert.
Yeah,
covert
100%.
operation.
It took me a long time to explain to people that nobody would ever believe that I de-radicalized, but I became a very committed person, not necessarily to the side of, because there is no side of a democratic nation state. I became committed to the system that we were just dedicated to destroying, because through all of its imperfections, one with the birth of ISIS could have it was just the onset that you could not change the fact that we were trying to fight and arrest our way out of a problem we could not fight and arrest our way out of. And my thinking started to become one of that was really full of grays between blacks and whites. And I really appreciated getting able to be back in that space of individualization that we discussed with the group. I was only me. My ex-wife is a fundamentalist, shunned me, called me kafir for what I did. My community that was Muslim and my identity that was Muslim, I was able to, understand some things that did not necessarily jive well with me about a culture versus a religion. I started to pick apart pieces of myself again by understanding the world, and my commitment and my conclusions, having read the founding fathers of the United States and looked at the world that the United States built in the post-World War II ambit, is that if we continued to fight this war, the war on terror, the way that we were fighting it, we were going to destroy our own system. And not bin Laden nor Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi was going to be the victor. The victor was going to be totalitarian regimes awaiting in the wings in Russia, China, and Iran, as a coalition. And having, seen what it's like under authoritarianism, I don't want to live in a world like that. And we really are at that point. And so my position with the resurrection of ISIS was, now we have an opportunity here for me to do some good and to make amends at that level, but also behind closed doors. We were talking about developing countering violent extremism in a proper way here in the United States, right? Also, I was privy to sit with academics and to discuss things. And I got very interested in understanding my own radicalization by understanding what other people said about it and what other people were doing about it. And I found was that most of what was being done and thought of was completely lacking expertise.
No, did you yourself go through psychological intervention as well?
No, in the United States, it's not very easy to get mental health care. There was a time when I did, so I came out in 2015 from jail, and I operated, like I said, I was outed in the Washington Post, and then I started to have conversations with George Washington University's program on extremism about going public as a research fellow. And I thought that my life it was a very difficult reintegration process. I was divorced. I was with an alcoholic who would drink, and I still hadn't, drunk. She would beat me when she was drunk. I went through a lot of stress and trauma and not knowing what the future was going to be. Then I'm outed in the Washington Post, and I was thinking that I was resilient enough to make it through all of that. So I couldn't get mental health treatment when I came home from jail, not consistently, at least, because of we don't have universal health care here in the U.S. So it's really hard for men.
Obamacare was kicked out, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was a process, and even then Obamacare was different because you still had to work to be eligible, and each state got funding. But I was living in Virginia, and these are all made it complicated. But it was something that should have occurred to me, but it didn't until I took a job at Program on Extremism. I went public, front page New York Times, PBS NewsHour, CNN primetime piece, all on the first day. Here's a former jihadist, and I was not just your typical jihadist, so my case was kind of prominent.
You must have been lapped up by all of the corporations then, didn't you?
Did I what?
They lapped you up. Do you understand? They picked you up.
The news media took it. Yeah, the news media took it, but it took me a year to get hired for people to trust me enough to consider hiring me. I had people stick up for me at the school that I was going to be hired at. But the story when I went public was not that I was reformed. The story was that George Washington University hires a terrorist. And the story that was in the New York Times was that I was abused as a child. And what nobody really recognized, except for Jessica Stern at Harvard University, was that I was re-traumatized and I needed to get trauma treatment. And if I didn't, I was going to blow up. She literally sent an email to my bosses, and my bosses kindly asked me, is this true? And I said no, because I thought I was a tough guy, and I relapsed on cocaine. So out of nowhere, and threw away like the opportunity of a lifetime. Like the institution that I'm talking about does such good work, and they're really good people, and I really like to get to know them, but I could not get myself together enough to do so, and I really hurt myself and relapsed and got arrested and ended up right back where I came from. And it was the most depressing thing to have tried to de-radicalize and then to figure out that the trauma that led to the addiction, that the ideology that you adopted became the addiction. You were addicted to extremism. And as soon as you took your addiction to extremism, you didn't know nor have the skill set to not be addicted to something. So eventually all you did was go back to what you knew before you picked up Islam. So Islam was my opiate. And I never really understood my own religion. I didn't let it heal me the way that it could have. And that was a key takeaway.
Truly. And I think, Jesse, look, this is a difficult one for especially people who are not from the faith, probably. Mm-hmm. They go, this is the religion, and because they have a certain narrative. Okay? Mm-hmm. And I know Ivan tends to talk about this a lot, that I got radicalized by Anjam Chaudhry, and I had a particular narrative, and I saw this religion not as a religion but as an ideology. Do you understand? But once you started to understand that it was a religion, what changed? Not you. I'm talking about Ivan.
Yeah, I know. It's just a delay on the screen. Sorry.
Yep. Sorry. What are you talking about?
Can you hear us? Yeah, Ivan.
I can hear you.
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question was around.
I've always said it's Chaudhry, and I think it was that around Chaudhry, yeah. So
that you had a particular narrative.
Chaudhry, and I become knowledgeable on his interpretation of Islam. It was his interpretation of Islam that I become knowledgeable on, because around where I live, I didn't have Muslims. I didn't know nothing about Islam until I researched him. Well, that's kind of how me and Jesse hooked up. We done a joint article for the Independent, I believe it was, wasn't it, Jesse?
Say it again, Ivan. I'm sorry, there's a delay on my end.
Yeah, so after I said about Chaudhry, I think that's how we online, weren't it? We did that article for Lizzie Dearden for the Independent.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I reached out to you because I understood that it's very important to tell these narratives about reciprocal radicalization. And your case is a perfect one. And now that we have recently established an ability to try to take our parallel networks light upon light philosophy to the UK, we are hoping that Ivan and Imran, I'd be open to you participating as well, can help us expand what we have established here in the US abroad. So,
and this is exactly what it is. Guys, this is something that we've seen, and I think this is exactly what Ivan and Jesse are both talking about. So, Jesse, shed some light on this. Pardon the pun. Light upon light. Where did that come from? What is it all about? Tell me the project.
Well, one of the things that I took away from my experiences, and it's a very long discussion, is that one of the problems of the countering violent extremism world is that it counters. And to counter something is to be completely reactive to it, not proactive. And then the other problem that I found is that largely what is not unperceived by people that believe that they have been de-radicalized, when you get to know these people and you get to know the people that are in the field, quite frankly, you start to see that for a large portion of the field, it's about money. They don't know what they're talking about. They couldn't have a real-time conversation about radicalization if their life depended on it. And for a lot of quote-unquote former extremists, they've not healed and gone through the process that it takes to go, and they've gone from one extremism to another. And so the problem is that the whole field is based upon faulty assumptions with regard to the theories of why people would want to disengage or de-radicalize. It's full of fraudulent notions. It's full of false fox science. And I don't mean to say that other than it's true. I believe if you see a fraud and you don't say it's a fraud, you're a fraud. You know, and so I think it's important, if you really want to have something as righteous as a field like this, which is trying to save lives, there should be a lot of integrity. And there's a lot of using and abusing and manipulation, and it's a joke. So in looking at that and understanding some of those limitations, what you see is that it's really not tackling the problem of hate or extremism in a way that is saying anything other than like, you're wrong, we're right.
Yeah.
It's addressing a problem in a very linear X, Y.
The idea of dominoes is perpetuated again.
Yes, exactly. So what Light Upon Light is it's a play off of where I have come to in consciousness, because I love Islam because it's compatible with science and academia and intellectualism. It's consistent with the scientific method. Unfortunately, in the reality, the practice of Islam has gone away from being able to contribute to those discussions. And I found that the most beautiful way for me to understand the nature of my intellect and all of our consciousness's connection to God is in that beautiful verse from Surah An-Nur. You know, Nur ala Nur, the light upon the light, is a description of the 7 layers of Allah Azza wa Jal, as if he's a niche in a small room leading into a book. And then inside of that glass is the glass jar, and inside of that is the wick, and the wick that burns is the fire. And all of these things that are related to the true illumination ending in the olive oil, right? And that Allah outside of time and space is the one that delivers the consciousness. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful parable metaphor for
من الظلم إلى النور.
Absolutely. No, yes, from darkness into light as well. And so, but there's also a great statement from someone that really taught me a lot about the design of the universe, and one who rejected the idea that everything is random, and that was Albert Einstein. And he has a great quote where he says that no problem has ever been solved at the same level of consciousness that created it.
Wow.
And I found that those two things merge, and I wanted to keep an Islamic identity with what I did, because I love my religion and I love what it has given to me. So Light Upon Light.online is just a hosting space for what we call our parallel network philosophy, which takes preventing and countering violent extremism programming, connects it to the underlying conflict, polarization, hate, different than extremism, because extremism is behavioral. Hate is an idea. It's very hard to measure. It's subjective in so many ways. And extremism, and looks at their intersections, but provides programming on every level of the social service spectrum, from prevention to strategic messaging to counter messaging, alternative messaging, to interventions into psychosocial mental health supports and building out new groups, and then into the realm of prevention. And we've built out a branded ecosystem that has a program on each of those. And different than other entities, we don't just do counter messaging. Yes. Link counter messaging to interventions, and interventions to psychosocial support. And we have an entire program and a spectrum of programming. And over the last 2 years, we launched Light Upon Light.online, coincident to the launch of me taking back those English language magazines that I created and creating a reformist product. That was in July of 2019. We launched on the 5th anniversary of ISIS's caliphate, as it was falling, Al Taqwa. That project went so well in Telegram, and being able to be the first counter-narrative product that was disseminated inside of the clandestine network. So everybody was counter-messaging then on YouTube and doing some things on Facebook. Let me
share this. Let me share this. This is it, yeah? What we say.
Yeah. If you scroll down, we've run 3 issues so far. That was toward when we assassinated the Soleimani, so to say. But if you keep scrolling down on that screen, you can see the very first edition. This is on the anniversary of 9/11.
It looks very similar. It looks very similar to your when you were
So
within when you were part of
you take
Islamist
your
organization? Yeah.
So you take your skill set and you redirect it. So that looks exactly like a copy of Dabik, the first edition of Dabik, but it says the so-called Khilafah, and we destroy it, we rip it apart. So I'm using my mastery, so to say, of the way that jihadists think in creating a narrative that also attaches itself to the fact that the narrative of extremism has to appeal to the spirit. So the message is very different. And from this single launch of an edition, we were able to dismantle the entire English-speaking most popular Telegram network on Telegram called
Wow.
Greenbirds, and we saw 22 effective interventions come about because when they read it, it was very different. Like, it is a very different approach to counter-narrative work. It elevates above. It does not demonize. It comes with true empathy. And the way that we disseminated it was a very strategic way. And to this day, people trust me. And so one of the things that people say formers can't achieve, light upon light, has very much disproven. I work with people all over the world that
No,
contact
no,
me
no.
regularly about the approach that we take. So that worked very well. And then in the end of 2019, we launched the far right wing iteration of it
Yeah.
in Ivan's. In Britain with Ivan as well. Ivan had an article in the first edition of Control Alt Delete Hate. And that's our philosophy. We link the counter messages at the end of every magazine, in
This is
every
it, isn't
post.
it?
What's that?
This is
That's
the
the
other side.
Control Alt Delete Hate method. Yeah, that's the different. That's the far right counter. It's not just far right. It's counter polarization, hate, and extremism, because we don't discriminate. You couldn't necessarily have a critical article of Antifa because you just have to deal with way too much stuff on like Twitter and all that. You have to have a cancel culture and like apologize, and you'd be very wrong to criticize people that burn down government buildings and then criticize other people for marching into others. So at the end of the day, we do this thing very differently. And the way that we do it is through a paradigm we call Control Alt Delete Hate, to control the space between stimulus and response, to paint those grays, to learn how to be comfortable and sit there. And then to alter your course, to take the skills that you have, if you're a former radicalizer and a recruiter, and to direct them in a way, in a manner in life where you can dedicate yourself to doing something different. You don't have to be a public former extremist to leave an extremist movement. There's all kinds of things that you can do, but you need a mentor. And on top of that,
How do you convince them?
It's not about convincing. It's about making the path accessible to those that seek it. So people think recruiters recruit for extremism by lurking in deep, dark corners of the mosque or of the internet and grabbing someone's mind and brainwashing them. And in actuality, it's a two-way street. So what we would quote in a justification for our methodology is the book Amr bil Maruf wa Nahy al Munkar by Ibn Taymiyyah. And he says in there, it's not the duty of the da'i, the one who calls to Islam, to make everyone in the world convert to the truth. It is your duty to make the truth accessible to those that seek it. And that worked very well because it changed the way that Revolution Muslim did their dissemination. We had to make the truth accessible to those that seek it. How do you do that? You have to narrate it in a way that's conducive to their cultural understanding, to their backgrounds.
ادعو إلى سبيل ربك ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So there is both elements, wisdom as well as in the best form. So
Yes,
when the Quran says best form, that's what this means. It has to be disseminated in a manner which is accessible.
And it and understandable for the audience, and you have to take those things into consideration.
Talk to the people according to the intellect. Understand? See what you are doing, Jesse, which is really phenomenal. This, and I think the elite academics or people who are working within the Western world, and why they have latched on to and hopefully started to understand what you are trying to do, is because all the ideas and the concepts and the philosophies you have taken from the West as well as from Islam, and you aligned them.
Yes, but
they are not contradictions, but they are very similar. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, and this is an ability from me when people understand that I can articulate my thinking, which is somewhat compatible with what you want to call Western. I don't call it Western. I get above and beyond. A dialogue of civilizations in the plural is what we talk about. And that's a whole nother story, and a conversation in itself is that I'm showing that I still retain the principles of the religion. And in actuality, I believe that I am, despite a lack of following the rules like I used to. This beard could not be trimmed. in the past until it got, and even then it was a statement of Ibn Umar. It wasn't a statement from the Prophet, so you had to let it grow. And it was very much like this, but that wasn't healthy for me. What was healthy for me from Islam that I never got was like the beauty of the principle, the axioms that drive it, the connection to the monotheistic creator.
Where did that come from? Because you told us about how you started to read these great thinkers, philosophers, individuals within the Western world. How did you get exposed to this particular narrative of Islam, which was not rigid, which was not extreme, which was not giving us a narrative where you cannot see the nuances, where you're going from that position to a position of seeing the nuances, seeing the beauty, seeing the love, seeing this. It doesn't matter who it is on the other side. It's a human being or a creature. I have to care for it. Where did that come from? How did that happen?
I spent 11 months in a cell with only Allah. And I would take those books when the guard would take me out those 4 days a week, but I couldn't take them back to the cell. So when I go back to the cell, I had Quran. I didn't have the tafsir anymore. So I recite the Quran and I pray for guidance. And I reflected on my life and I understood what I had lived up to that point. And me and Allah sat alone for a very long time. Not that you can say that Allah sat with you. Excuse me, a'udhu billah. This is the way that we used to think. It would have been impermissible to even say this. Allah sits, a'udhu billah, kafir. Right? And so
Khawarij,
exactly. And so I sat alone with God and I sat alone with myself, and I had deep conversations about who I really was and how loving I was. And I still was a loving jihadist, but I never lost love and emotion.
Let me hold you there.
I just hated the kuffar. I loved the Muslims.
1 second, bro. Come on, 1 second, bro.
Go ahead, man.
No, wait, 1 second. You just said I was a loving jihadist.
I was.
And the amazing thing, the sad thing is that the word jihad or jihadist, right, is today seen as a very negative term, right? But we can talk about soldiers. We can talk about our heroes. We can talk about, and something I'm all for 100%. I'm with that because I understand these people put their lives on the line for us. Why is it that the word jihadist has been seen as something alien and something like, oh, these are worst people on earth?
Well, my good friend Mark Sageman refuses to call them jihadists. He calls them neo-jihadists because he says jihad is a part of Islam.
Yeah.
This is let's not get this twisted, but it doesn't mean physical jihad. And he's right to say so. A jihadist who is fighting against Bashar al-Assad, who is not worried about killing civilians or fighting with those that disagree with them in Syria, might very well still be a jihadist and might be fighting just war and justly. And this is the problem with the way that we have understood things, right? But the jihad, like all extremists, love their in-group, right? So I was defined by love, but I actually was defined by hatred because the principles of love and compassion, it didn't look at each individual as an individual who should have to be judged based upon the merits of their self. It looked at what group do you belong to?
Yes.
That's the problem we live in today. We're stuck in that, right? And in order to overcome tribalism and to elevate to a next level of consciousness, you have to learn that every individual is in it. From being an extremist movement to Ivan, people are horrible, but on the aggregate, people are self-centered and behave this way. It's something that anytime you get involved in groupthink, so how you elevate above that is you can have an identity that is Muslim, but I learned in that cell alone with God that you and your relationship with God, and this is where the Enlightenment thinking comes in. This is where Thomas Paine comes in. This is where the Founding Fathers come in. This is where all of that comes in, is if you're going to stand in front of your creator, you don't want to have to be forced to study just at the hands of a sheikh and memorize rote memorization. You want to feel your love. You want to feel your connection to God. And the way that you do that in a situation like I was in is you cry a lot. You process trauma a lot. You're in therapy, but with God. And who better to be in therapy with? Maybe sometimes you can use a mentor or a guide. I didn't have one. But I do know that in my mind, I was able to reconfigure things, and I was able to take a heart that had a lot of desire to help the poor and the oppressed, who I was told the poor and the oppressed were. and to apply it to humanity in general and anyone that I come into contact
You
with,
do.
based upon the merits of whether they deserve it or not.
So you had in a spiritual enlightenment.
I don't know. I think life is a journey and a process. I don't know if I would call it an enlightenment, because I don't think that I am enlightened. I had a spiritual experience that made the negative lived experience that I had.
And from a Christian concept, in a Christian concept, you were reborn.
Yeah,
ooh, you've gone a bit
but
too low there. A bit too low there.
depends. Yeah. Yeah, it depends. I mean, you can't be reborn just by accepting something as your savior. You want to be reborn, you have to put the work in, you know? So like, yes, from the Christian concept, it is the concept of rebirth. But I don't know, because you're still yourself, and you have to hold on to yourself, because in order to forgive yourself, you can't forget who you were. You have to understand how who you were and the energy that's inside of us all was allocated towards a wrong-headed perspective. But if you really want to overcome it, you got to tell yourself, I'm sorry, you're still worthy of being loved. You know, and that's really the secret of pulling people out of these movements, is to allow them to feel that kind of in-group love that they get, and to experience with a group that's built on antithetical principles to those extremists provide, but provides the same sincerity.
Truly. Now, Ivan, I know you came across something similar when you were at BBC. It was at BBC Three program, wasn't it, about covering the tattoo or something around the tattoo. It's a similar type of conversation that, look, I don't want to forget my past. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, that was it. That video I did 3 or 4 years ago went viral, and somebody from the BBC noticed the EDL tattoo I got. I mean, I'm there, still got it. They offered it to cover it up for me, to move on in my life. And I sort of said, no, I don't need to move on by covering my tattoo up. That's part of who I was. I want to keep it there, so in future, I know, look at that, I've come from, do you know what I mean? And then I did manage to blag him into getting a positive one done on my other arm, do you know what I mean? But for just a thought of me to get rid of that tattoo just wasn't an option, because that's covering up who I was.
And the thing is, that journey is important, even for yourself and people who you influence or you change. That you don't have to let go of your past, but you learn from your past. And I think, Jesse, that has become an issue, especially with the youth as youngsters. Many of us don't know our reality of our past. We are the children of the empire. It's so easy sometimes for us to fall into extremities. People say, oh yeah, you are this, you are that. And one of the key areas that me and you works in, Jesse, is that we work a lot. We do a lot of work in schools. And one of the things that we keep on countering again and again is about identity and belonging. We talk about that, we discuss that. We talk from primary school all the way to colleges, universities. And what we've seen is that there is a lack of that within our academic educational structure. So a lot of children won't know what the reality of the history was of Britain ruling over India, for example, and what really happened. And someone who's done a little bit of study, right, can use that to create hate. Right? And it's a very simple historical fact that how the British treated your forefathers.
Yeah, exactly.
So so it is highly important. So when you say that it's important for you to know where you came from, but it has to be done in a way where you have a holistic understanding where you came from.
Yeah. Well, that's because the way we teach people, it's the same thing as studying at the feet of a jihadist cleric. You have to memorize facts. And like most people realize that the stuff they learned in high school, right, it did not give them something they remember today. What it did is it gave them a skill set, and it built a character that largely would be carried on throughout the rest of their life. It builds responsibility if it's done properly. But what real education should do is build awareness, self-awareness, understanding of critical thinking and cognitive biases. We should be training people about trauma and the fact that we are all going to experience this, and that there are ways of life that are healthy for us to live. And that's what Muslims can have a dynamic that is provided in healthy communities that are Islamic, is really powerful. right? Because the whole society is based upon social connection. And one of the things that made the Islamic empires, and they're not really empires at the height and zenith of their ruling, because they were so decentralized, and the Islamic system, the Millah system, made it very impossible to sort of, not allow Jews and Christians to have their own little communities and networks. Is that's what we need to do. We need to allow culture to flourish and to not have culture appropriated by consumerism.
Yes.
Right. And so we need to have meaning to our lives. We're human beings that need meaning, and nothing that we offer in our educational systems teach us how to define meaning. They don't ask us to define meaning. And if we have meaning and purpose, and we're living with a purpose to our lives, and we know whether we believe in God or whatever is not the point. You can be a total humanist and be an atheist and believe that what you should do with your life is something that leaves a legacy that has meaning and purpose and that is interesting. We don't pique curiosity. We don't pique consciousness. What we do is we give rote memorization of facts, and we give rigor. And that's important. We need science. We need technology. We need to put the tools in place for the kids that will gravitate towards those fields to gravitate towards those fields. But we need to build character. And instead,
I do a lot of work. I'm going to hold you there.
Yep, go ahead.
I do a lot of work with kids, young children. Mm-hmm. And one of the most powerful things I've learned from children is why.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This is, and when you look at human psychology, when you look at how we develop as human beings, the why is the thing that makes us human.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
The questioning of that, what you were talking about is exactly this point.
Mm-hmm.
But do not just take something as face value. Question it. Find the nuance in it. Find different aspects and elements to it. And I learned that by working with young children, that because they are inquisitive, because they want to understand their surroundings, they won't just take your word for it. They go, but why do I have to do this? Why can't I do this? Why can't I go there? You have to give explanation. And I think one of the key things, and you're right to say this, that one has to understand that there is more to just one particular narrative. There are many, many aspects. And I think that is exactly it. Once we do that, and I think a lot of people that you work with, and you got something on the website, which I think is phenomenal. You got something called Shapeshifters. And you have some amazing people on there, because it's not only yourself or I intend to do this. And I want to bring them on. I want to bring that up, and I want you to shed some light on that as well. That there's so many, it's not, because extremists of all types. And some may suit with one, may not suit with the other, which I thought was really, really cool, and I want to share that. So could you shed some light on who these people are, and why you have also chosen to go down this particular route of including these individuals as well?
Sure. So we have the paradigm is control, alt, delete, hate. So the process that we take people through is to control the space between stimulus and response, alter course, make a commitment to nonviolence, and do something with your life that can make amends if you leave a movement. And then hate, to delete hate, is to really impart a better awareness. Like now everybody thinks the sky is falling because of domestic extremism. We've been talking about this stuff for 3 years and preparing for this moment, particularly with the light upon light paradigm. That links to shift hate, which is support and help for individuals and families touched by hate. That's the intervention component that's plugged by the counter messaging material. And then what you're seeing here is a byproduct of what we call Save Hate, which is Society Against Violent Extremism and Hate. And it's very important for us to understand that, like, if I'm working with an individual, and of course, as we evolve, things will get better, but we're testing the waters, we're learning systems, we're changing the field, actually. People steal our stuff all the time. It's great. And you have a one-on-one conversation. You convince an individual to leave an extremist movement. The question that they have is, after the whys that you're talking about, the question that they have next is, and what if? Where do I go? And so, as a scholar put it in a topic that explored the sociological aspects of group belongment with regard to joining extremist group like ISIS, title of the paper was great. I actually rip it off quite frequently. It says, it's group, not God, right? And I think that that's what's important in de-radicalization too, because what you find is group belonging, meaning, significance, purpose, camaraderie when you join an extremist movement. If I'm going to tell a person that you need to leave a movement and then just drop them off, like what the people that criticize us want us to do is tell them that they have to go behind closed doors and punish themselves because they used to be a white supremacist, and they can't talk publicly because they might trigger someone by sharing their story, and they should go suffer and squalor and have nothing. What we do is we put people around those individuals, right? We put new people. I'll introduce them to an Ivan. I'll introduce them to Daryl Davis. I'll make a call, and introduce them to other people that work with our organization, and they get to know them, and they have access, if they choose to do so, to join our organization and to become a part of our family, right? And
Oh, you
that
just hit the nail on the head. You just said it.
and they're helping
Family.
us achieve our
Yeah.
objectives, right? And
You
so,
used the word family.
yeah,
And I think that's exactly what you've did. You're giving them love.
yes,
You're
but we
giving
have
them
to check.
friendship.
And
Go for it.
inside of our family, we've had all kinds of drama, right? So we have to solidify the ability to build a real family with real people, because you have to have people working. If you're going to do countering violent extremism, the people have to be sincere, and they have to know what they're doing, right? And they have to know what they're doing. And we're happy that we have arrived. We've done so much since we launched in June of 2019. It is now less than 2 years of having a public facing website. 120. It's actually more, because we were doing interventions before. So it's 120 since we launched the website, at least effective interventions that I can tally and think of their names inside of my head every day. And even before that, preparing to do them, and we have people reach out all the time, sisters from stuck in Syria, trust me, don't trust the international community. And we want them to. And we implore people to continue to reach out like this. People in the rest of the world now benefiting from the trauma and countering violent extremism informed approach I'm innovating with. It's been so fun, but it's amazing to see the fact that the field that we work in is not familial. And it doesn't understand the importance of being a good family to people and being sincere and being honest, because people steal our stuff, people manipulate us all the time. And but that's okay, because when you're engaged in a struggle to change something and to make something holistically whole, you're going to experience those troubles along the way. And so what you see with the Shapeshifter page is the people that we've really centered in on, that we think are part of our family, but that are also qualified to work with someone, that needs their help. And you can offer them a menu and a selection. We've grown a lot more selective with regard to who we work with. But yes, that's what shapeshifters are. They're our interventionists.
And they're interventionists, and they're phenomenal people. And some of them we've had the honor to even bring on this particular platform. And Jesse, I when we do our deliveries as well, and one of the key things I always say is that extremists use something called dehumanization to justify the killing and the murder of normal human beings. But sadly, we do the same. We dehumanize them. We call them monsters. We call them evil. We call them devils, right? But once an individual wants to change, our individual has made and have reflected and thought, and in your case, you started by de-radicalizing, or at least reflecting over your personal state, going to the library, coming back into your solitary confinement state, reflecting over yourself, reading the Quran, and looking at yourself. Is this what Islam really is? No, it must be more than this. It's about love, it's about compassion, it's about understanding. And then you get to a place where you say, wow, I want to get out of this. And sadly, what you come across is, no, you're a monster, you're a killer, you're a murderer. How does one deal with that?
Well,
not
everybody could, and a lot of people want to leave these movements, but they don't have an alternative. And so, that's what you have to provide them. You can't just provide them an answer to their questions and come at them as if I'm going to show you why you're wrong, which is what happens, whether we realize it or not, a lot in this intervention space. You have to provide them something, and you have to provide them a mentor a lot of times, because people aren't strong enough to walk away on their own, or in the event, it's not even about strong enough to walk away on their own. That's the wrong way to put it. There's something to be said for having a guide, because it's a courageous step to take, right? And there's something to be said for having somebody to talk to. Like I used to talk to a OG and a former gangster in the prison system. He was my mentor. He had come from running as a kingpin in Newark, New Jersey, and Harlem, New York. Back in the day, like people that movies were made about. And walking around the yard, and he had become a Muslim in prison, and now was sending some of the money that he had remaining from his days as a drug dealer back into the Newark community to do gang violence reduction.
Yes.
And I wanted to find out from the old timer, because he was 75 years old, what have you learned from all that experience? And that was mentorship, walking the track inside of a federal facility and finding an individual that has, really gone through the transformative process can be a model for you. And I had many, along the way, people that, and so a lot of times it is that one-on-one interventionist that can do that, but you have to be able to put yourself inside of a new group too. You don't have to be a public former, but you got to find some way for them in their community to be aware of different things or to encourage them to do so. But it's a process. And it is really difficult because that's why individuals that come to us, one of the only reasons that they come to us is because we don't do that, and we know that a lot of the other organizations that claim to get interventions or that have helplines or that, they fabricate. Because everybody that we talk to, we're like, why don't you go see them? Because we want to know. And they're like, because they went from the far right to the far left, and they don't understand our movement, and they don't talk to people like they're human, and that they send a message of arrogance and superiority, and so we know how extremists really see what is being offered to them to de-radicalize, and they perceive it to be dehumanizing, and all you have to do is ask them. But usually intervention's about telling people why they're wrong. It's not about asking them how they see the world or who they are.
See, Jesse, you see the way when I'm listening to you, and I know it seems very radical the way you're speaking, because
I am radical, yeah.
And the world,
I'm benevolently radicalized, like my friend Ken Reedy says. You should be non-violently pro-socially radicalized. We have to make this field work. This field of practice that we are engaged in, it's a moral responsibility for us to get this right. These are civilian lives on the line here. This is not an industry. If you want to study radicalization and extremism, go into law enforcement or a component of this industry that can, do something for the good of people, and to not say that there's problems with what we're offering people in the way right now. To talk about the Capitol riots all day long for months and months. Right now, as we speak, in Minneapolis, there's another autonomous zone by far leftists that have taken over 6 blocks of an entire city. The business owners, the homeowners don't want them there, but they consider it theirs. And an African American is shot within that autonomous zone, right? Because it's the same community that George Floyd was killed in. And they don't let the medics onto the street to help the individual. Now, if you would think for 1 minute,
this goes against the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, if the Proud Boys were to take 5 blocks of American City over tomorrow, and an African American would be shot that was a resident of those those blocks, and they would not let, the medics in to help that individual, and that individual died, and his own mother denounced, and she's an advocate and an activist for Michael Floyd, right, and for the situation that is unfolding in Minneapolis right now, and there's not one published article on it. Think about if it was a white supremacist group. The international media, even in Britain, would be flying right now to Minneapolis to cover it. And we don't have the backbone because the spoiled little kids that have taken over cancel culture and are pushing this narrative are conducting attacks every day that destroy property and that have an objective of tearing down capitalism and tearing down our society. And I agree, let them riot, let them scream, let them get out their anxiety. That's not a solution. But the fact that the people that we want to leave white supremacy have to see that contradiction and hypocrisy because of money and who's in power, you're not in this field for the right reasons. And so, yes, that's radical. That's absolutely radical to say, as it should be, because it needs to be said.
Yeah,
and there's all kinds of other things you could say. Yeah,
of course. No,
it's important.
In mind, because I know you're thinking of launching the magazine in Britain as well. All right, so you'll be coming over onto this side of the pond as well.
Inshallah, I'd love to.
Some of the work, alhamdulillah, that you are doing, I know yourself and Ivan work very, very closely. Ivan has done a number of articles for yourself as well. Your view, I've worked with Ivan for a number of years, Jesse. What you are saying resonates within my heart and, of course, the heart of Ivan as well. And one of the key things I've seen is that you are about the human being, regardless of what the exterior looks like, regardless of how, you know, scary it may seem. You look at the mushy bit inside that human being. And I think as the mainstream, and in fact you touched on something very, very important. Sadly, we have so many extremities in our society, not only the far right, but the far left, the Islamist, whatever. And we need to find what the Quran says, ummatan wasata,
Mm-hmm.
the central nation,
Mm-hmm.
the central people.
The
And I think,
balanced collective, yes. It's true.
yes, 100%.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and I think the centralization, which is really difficult for people. Look, you know, some of the areas where I get the opportunity to work, people get really worried, really, they have a
Mm-hmm.
concern with that. They go, "How can you work with people who've done this, 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 this?" I go, "1
Mm-hmm.
minute, they've done it.
Mm-hmm.
They've been judged, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
what is my duty? My duty is to support and help them to think a different way
Yeah.
and become more productive citizen and
Mm-hmm.
participants of society. That can't be one extreme or the other extreme. It has to be a central way of doing it. And I think both of yourselves, you know, big up to both of you. You know, may the Lord Almighty give both of you strength. I think our today's conversation was really powerful. You know, it gives a glimpse into, Jesse, how you think, how you reflect. You have this amazing psychological ability to reflect over 10, 15, 20, 30 different things at one time and and I think when it comes to de-radicalization, as you know of radicalization because you were one of them as well, that is a process of doing that. And I think for our listeners and hopefully for our future, when we'll get more of you on this particular
Mm-hmm.
platform and other platforms, and hope, I know yourself and Ivan work very, very closely, and hopefully we
Mm-hmm.
can do more of this because
Mm-hmm.
it is about the human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed. And I will end by saying a statement that we should all adhere to, that are in this space, that are trying to look at ways to combat these things that we see. Like Margaret Mead, she said, everybody quotes it, never doubt that a small group of people can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has. But, you know, the way that I understand the Prophet Muhammad now is kind of with the Quran, he brought not a center pass, not ummatun wasatuha, because wasatuha is a balance, but it's a balance that's of perfection. And so, to take a central path is a little bit different than what we need right now. Because what the Prophet Muhammad did is he came to a desert Arabian people who had no written word, and he brought, but were poetic in their own right. They had their civilization. They were known for their poetry. And here comes Quran, and it shatters in the brevity and the conciseness, in the beauty of the speech. And it created a literacy movement. It was
Yeah.
based upon people being able to read and to recite and to learn about language, and activating elevated levels of language spread throughout the world, and created a salvation that was truly a consciousness shift. Right. And so that's exactly what we need in this day and age. And it's very important, you know, to keep going in a direction, you know, to take from those stories and those narratives of those individuals that you hold and that you value. And it's amazing for me that I can use my prophet and our prophets as a guide unto today, you know, and to see from that how the stories that we hold dear, and they become the stories that we tell about ourselves, and to emulate people who are now no longer waging jihad to conquer the world, because Islam was come from the beginning to, you know, to be superior over all other ways of life, and waving your hand like Anjum Chowdhury and screaming and hollering. It's a strategic, tactful, peaceful state of existence that is Islam, that I think that Western societies still have a lot to learn from. And I also think the principles in the religion of Islam have a lot to give the field of preventing and countering violent extremism.
You know, I remember, you know, Hamza, do you know Yusuf Islam, Cat Stevens?
Cat Stevens, yeah.
The singer, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing an interview, and in an interview he said, if I had met Muslims before I got introduced to Islam, I would have
I remember
reconsidered.
this.
That's a very powerful statement. In fact, it says a lot about how Muslims practice their Islam. We say it's about love. It's about
Mhm.
compassion. It's about mercy. It's about
Mhm.
understanding. It's about knowing that all humans, regardless of their background, regardless of their religion, regardless of what they are and how they are, and all creatures, we have an obligation towards to care for and to look after.
Mhm. Yeah.
And and the thing is, and the point that you are making is a profound, and the reality of our situation is we need to practice what we claim to preach.
Yes. And
Muhammad Rasulullah.
this is the essence of, you know, the simplistic world that the extremists split the world into, is kuffar, munafiqin, and believers, meaning uh, eradicating hypocrisy from inside of your own community is more important, right,
Yeah.
than dealing with the enemy, so to say. And we have become an enemy to our own selves. And I'm not talking the Muslim community, I'm talking about the people of the West in general. And like, it's really time that we need a reformist sort of, we need energy in the direction of being able to elevate and to have some level of multiculturalism that still has a spiritual ethos. And what we have right now is we have decentralized notions that don't have that cohesion, that they're not feeding the soul. They're just smashing cop cars,
Yes.
right? They're just hating black people for no sense. Jihadists hating. We have hate everywhere. And I think that it's important for as many people as possible to adopt the principle of, like, every time you interact with another human being, if you just try to be the best you can be to them, that in and of itself for the rest of your life, trying to look at every encounter that you have with an individual as divinely written. And I try to think, even the gas station attendant is an opportunity to pay attention and to be present. You can play, you can have fun, you can be humorous. Doesn't mean you have to be serious and like straight face, but just look at each exchange as an opportunity to just convey humanity,
Yes.
right? And people are so afraid of people that walk around like that, and having begun, having become a person who is able to do that and pay attention to it. People don't trust it. People are so scared of each other.
Yeah, it's very alien to them.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
why is he being nice?
yeah. And it's not even like, you could see like fake nice with some level of just trying to be nice or whatever, but just like to look at each opportunity to engage, just like this, to three people
No,
talking. You
no.
never know. Maybe we have two people listening in, or two people that watch it later, or maybe 200. It doesn't matter, because maybe it's that one person that needs to hear the conversation. And then everything becomes it's meaningful. Everything that you do, even the smallest things that you do, have meaning. And then you don't have to be an Instagram influencer, or someone who has fame and fortune, because you can look at the microcosm that is your world, and you can do what you can. And it's like the NA principle, like, God give me the courage to change, the things that I can, whatever it is. The serenity prayer is a beautiful prayer. Is that you can only change. And in Islam, we say, God doesn't change the condition of a person until he changes what is inside of himself.
So
And if you just turn inward, you start to do the best you can do, the ratio of work that you do on yourself will manifest itself in your external world. I firmly believe that that is a divine principle of the nature of our existence.
it is. We have something within our tradition called tazkiyah,
Mhm.
nafs.
Mhm.
Cleansing of the self, reflection.
Mhm.
And there's
Purification.
I don't know what your study is around. Ghazali, Imam Ghazali, Hamd al-Ghazali. Now, he's a prime example of an individual who lived in the world, who studied well, who was a highly educated individual, who had a very prominent position in a governance. He leaves all of that to find himself.
Mhm. Yes.
And when he
Yes.
found himself, then others start to find what he really was about
Mhm.
in reality. And I think that reality and essence of reality is important.
Mhm.
Once we get to that, who am I? What am I? What is my purpose? Why am I here? And I think, Jesse, wow, man, the conversation was buzzing. I've got to
Well,
give it
thank
to
you for
you. Do you
having
know
me.
what I mean? No, thank you for coming down, man. Do you know what I'm saying? Ivan, my man, are there any words of
Thank you, Ivan.
reflection, ponders for yourself?
Now, just to thank Jesse for coming on again, twice in fact, one after week after the next. Is there any last sort of thoughts you've got, Jesse, that give people a bit of hope within?
I mean, I think that the conversation was full of hope. I think that it's something that we can all be grateful that things are, in the crises that we face, going to be an opportunity coming up. But I don't think that we should be looking for solutions from the same system or the same order that we've come to grow accustomed with. I think we should be truly elevating above
Yes.
all the division and trying to induce a new enlightenment, if you will, which takes us back to a key component of today's conversation. So
May Allah give you strength. May Allah Almighty give all of us strength to be sincere in our work. Jesse,
I mean,
it has been a great honor to have a conversation with you, to go through your journey, go through your life. For us, like when you studied Malcolm X and you found the nuances and you saw something in him, today, I'm going to be blunt, I also see that in you. And I think you have a very sincere, very clear way of dealing with this. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that what you did when you were in that system, that you using that anyway, that more people are de-radicalized and they start understanding themselves and they become much more functioning human beings in the system. Guys, you were listening to Creating the Conversation podcast. Our awesome guest, Jesse Morton. Guys, you can go online, Light Upon Light online. Check that out. Check the material on there, which will really help yourself, your families. And there's so many aspects and elements to learn on there. The people that these guys got on there are some of the most inspirational human beings that I had the honor to read, to meet, and to see. And hopefully, once this COVID thing elapses, we can be in the same physical space with you, man.
That would be beautiful. I'd love to see the UK someday if they would let me in. Inshallah.
Definitely. No, I'm saying we can have a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or maybe some Pakistani cha, bro. Pakistani cha, bro. That's what we're gonna do, guys. Peace out. Man. Look after yourself.
Good to see you, Ivan. Good to see you, Imran. Thank you for having me. Talk to you later.
Don't go anywhere, bro. Don't go anywhere.
I know the drill.